Hello, it's me again, Dr. Neil Buttery, food historian and chef, and welcome to the British Food History Podcast. My guest today is food writer, podcaster, and cheese enthusiast, Jenny Linford, and we are going on a bit of a regional food tour across the UK. I'll let you know my news at the end of the episode, including a food history walking tour for kids in Bradford and a new recipe on the blog. But as per usual, I'll give a headline now. And that is, in case you missed it last episode, there is now a secret version of the podcast containing extended full episodes. Now, as you may or may not know, I cut down episodes to be around 40 minutes in length, which means I have to remove some choice chunks of conversation. These used to appear on my Easter eggs page, but it's a bit clunky to listen to them that way, so now I have the secret British Food History podcast for you. For example, this episode contains 22 minutes of bonus material, including the story behind Farmhouse Caerphilly cheese, appreciation of Betty's Tea Rooms of York, how food is tied to place, gastropatriotism, and Britain's bad food rep, plus quite a lot more because we get through quite a lot of things in this chat. To access it, you need to be a £3 monthly subscriber, so go to britishfoodhistory.com and click on the Support the Blog and Podcast tab. Subscribers also get access to the Easter eggs page, plus extra blog posts, a monthly newsletter, and first dibs on special events. Alternatively, on there you can gift me with a one-off virtual coffee or pint. But of course there are all sorts of ways to support. One excellent way is to leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast app, or a like on the new YouTube channel, and of course tell your friends and post on social media. Now, this season of the podcast is sponsored by Fruit Pig, Britain's last remaining commercial craft producer of fresh blood black puddings. Fruit Pig, aka Matthew Cockin and Grant Harper, you heard them last episode on the podcast, put a huge amount of care and attention into harvesting fresh blood to create a proper, traditional, unique, and very delicious black pudding. Also available are their gluten-free black puddings, their decadent hog's pudding, and their traditional haggis. They also make bacon and sell some excellent British charcuterie. Now, you can check out your local butcher because they just may stock them. My local butcher does. But you can also visit fruitpig.co.uk for more details of their products and their journey, and to access their shop. And Grant and Matthew are very kindly giving listeners to the British Food History Podcast a unique special offer, 10% off your order until the end of October 2025. Use the offer code FOODHIS, that's FOODHIS, all one word, capital F. Use that at the checkout. So please support, if you can, these wonderful producers, because you're killing two birds with one stone, because you're supporting them and you're supporting me at the same time. Okay, let's get cracking. I am talking with Jenny Linford, host of A Slice of Cheese podcast and author of several books. Today we are talking about her new book called The Great British Food Tour, published by the National Trust. It's beautifully illustrated and contains recipes as well, and we go on a little food tour of our own, visiting all four home nations. We mention loads of dishes, so there are lots of links to previous pertinent pod episodes and blog posts. We talked about our mutual appreciation of Jane Grigson, Welsh cakes, English fish dishes, marmalade, champ, and Tunnock's teacakes at the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, amongst many other things. I'll be back at the end with my news, but now please enjoy a regional food tour with Jenny Linford. Welcome to the podcast, Jenny. I hope you're well. I've really enjoyed reading your book.
Oh, Neil, thank you very much. It's lovely to be on it, actually. Thank you.
Now, before we get started, would you be able to tell listeners a little bit about yourself and the book and how it came about?
Well, I've been a food writer for a long time, for over 30 years, so pre-internet age, as I tell young people. And I've done a lot of writing about food and place, particularly about London. because my first book was called Food Lovers London. It was a multicultural food shopping guide to London. This latest book was written for the National Trust, commissioned by them, and it's called The Great British Food Tour. And it's a light-hearted, I would say, and entertaining, hopefully, journey around Britain through its regional foods, which I very much enjoyed writing.
Now, a book on regional foods is a never-ending book to write. It'd be like 15 volumes or something. How did you choose the foods that went in there? There must have been so many that you wanted to include but couldn't for space.
Well, I think what was interesting is the fact the regional nature of the book was a sort of limitation because, there are obviously lots and lots of foods in Britain, but not all of them have a sense of place attached to them, oddly enough. Some of them are bigger and broader and more national. So that was quite useful. And then the demands of representing the various regions, because that's how the book is divided. But then also what I wanted to do was, have a bit of fun with it, really. And I wanted to represent different aspects of British life, of British culinary life, I suppose. So I want to reflect Britain's industrial heritage. So I put in things like Marmite and iron brew and had a bit of fun with that, I think. And as well as obviously our great agricultural past and talk about wonderful, things like Gloucester cattle. But then I also very much wanted, what's important for me is that if you look at Britain nowadays, I wanted a sense of Britain's food scene, not set in aspic, from 100 years ago. I wanted a sense of the vitality, really, of Britain's food scene. So I also wrote about things which I've seen happen in the decades that I've been writing about food in Britain, which has been a period when I've seen a massive interest in British food and a pride in British food, I think, really come to the surface. But so I put in things like urban honey, English sparkling wine, which are more, the more recent decades. These are food phenomenon. And also put in, which is very important, the multicultural richness of Britain. So I put in histories of foods like sushi and samosas and pizza. Because, if you go to a supermarket, if you go to Tesco's or Sainsbury's, if you look around, the foods you will see they've become part of the British palate. Foods from many different parts of the world, Chinese food, Indian food, Italian food. So I wanted that represented in the book as well.
No, it's great because the story of Britain is a story of waves of immigration from, at least in terms of our history, from the Roman period.
Yeah, quite. Let's start with the Romans, yes.
So it's really nice. Yes, there's sort of more recent waves now are beginning to settle down and settle in and become not just food that some people eat in Britain, but have become proper British food.
Yeah, I think they really have. Food is fascinating the way that it travels and moves and gets absorbed. And obviously Britain, we were a great trading nation and the nation that had an empire. And both those factors are really critical, I think, to the food scene that we have now, because, people came as part of the British Empire. They had a right to settle here. They brought with them their food culture, and that's become part of Britain's food culture.
No, it's nice because, a few hundred years ago, back when the national dish was plum pudding and roast beef, you'd have this plum pudding, which is a very British thing. That doesn't exist anywhere else. But it's full of the ingredients of empire. Exactly. The spices, the fruit. Yeah. Whereas now we've got the ingredients of empire, but we've got the people actually living in those, or who did live in those countries, who've now migrated over, making something that's more akin to their food from the countries they originally came from or their families came from. The one that springs to mind, I think, is like chicken tikka masalas.
The famous one, yes. Yes, in Balti in the book, because, it was linked to place, very clearly, obviously linked to Birmingham. And so that's why I was able to put that in the book, which I wanted to pay tribute to that strand.
Because it's very obviously from the Indian subcontinent area from our point of view, but yet people from India would not recognise it as something Indian. It's very much its own thing. It's nice to see some pretty obscure things too. I'd never heard of Melton hunt cake. And I thought I was pretty well versed in regional foods. But I was like, oh. Yes,
never
heard of that one.
Yeah, it was fascinating because it was fun. The fun I had, which you can imagine how much I enjoyed it, was digging around and coming up with a list. Because, at first when I was approached, I was like, oh yeah, I can think of loads of things. And then there's always a sort of sifting out process, I think, where you, I need to try and get variety and texture. The bit I love about being a food writer is I learn all the time. So I really enjoy the research.
The best bit doing the research.
I agree. It's great
then
fun.
You've got to write it.
Yeah. But that's also fun too. So, I think, I just really enjoyed it. And it sent me back to wonderful writers I love. Jane Grigson, she wrote books. She wrote English Food. She wrote A Guide to British Cookery. She's one of the writers who inspired me to become a food writer.
She's my heroine.
Ah, there we go. We share that in common because, it was,
I love her.
Well, when I was a bookseller before I was a food writer, and reading Jane Grigson, she's such a thoughtful, clever, as well as a very rooted and practical food writer. And I love that combination and her sense, for me, food, what interests me about food, even though I love eating food, I love its deliciousness, but I love the fact that food is about society and history and culture and place. And it's a great, big, interesting subject. That's what I love about it.
Yeah, and that's why something like a hunt cake is important. People are probably not going to rush out and find out how to make a hunt cake, but it tells us a lot about our society, that there's food made especially for hunts.
For the hunts, absolutely. And he said the pork pie, again.
Which we don't think about these days, or most of us.
Well, the pork pie, again, the origins, in the hunts. I mean, hunts, was very, think all those wealthy people turning up for these prestigious hunts, and local tradespeople were like, great, let's make them portable food that can be handed up to someone in a saddle, kept in a saddle bag, or enjoyed afterwards. And so, so it's very, all these little local economies at work is really fascinating. And I was really struck when I was researching the book by the power of the railways when they come along, and how they transform the way foods that were local and enjoyed locally, so that fresh perishable foods can then be transported way more quickly and efficiently into urban centres, so the big cities, into Manchester or Birmingham or London. And so you have these railway lines that are associated with products. It's such a wonderful image, the watercress line in Hampshire. That, again, I wanted to put that in the book because you're looking at this. I think the nice thing about this book is it's written in these nice little chunks. It's very easy to dip in and out of it, but I wanted to sort of cast a light on our history, obviously, and get people to think about, how important the railways were and what they meant. And they allowed access to markets for people, for growers. You could then suddenly, it's like the same thing with milk, in the way that milk was sent when the railways came. We had herds of cows in St James's Park because fresh milk, it had to be fresh. But when railways came, it could be transported more quickly. You have this whole different industry and Welsh dairies sending milk into London.
No, indeed, it's fascinating, isn't it? And I think it's also a time where we had a chance to sort of more unify our national cuisine, because now people could buy ingredients that they couldn't get hold of before. So you find that, I don't know, something that was being made up in Grimsby with fresh fish could be cooked over, in Wales or something. I mean, I'm making up the route. I'm sure there wasn't a route between those two, but it meant everyone had all this access.
Yes, it's true. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's a very good point to make. But yes, and I think as people move into cities, that process of the migration from hard to access remote country regions to cities, which are accessed by their nature with roads and then with rail. And therefore you do get a sort of homogenization, I suppose, and a sharing, the capacity, to enjoy things, because for trade reasons, it's, bigger markets. It's always about, isn't it? The capacity to be able to sell something, capacity to buy something. It's so important in food. And that's what shaped, and that's the amazing thing about London. In a way, the whole book could have been about London, because London has had a great big tranche of, if you look at the foods in Britain, London plays a huge part in many of them. So in fact, one of my issues was to try and share out that history, particularly, I suppose, in a way of the foods that arrived more recently. It's very tempting to go, London's where it all began, everything. But I wanted to acknowledge that, there was a Jewish community in Manchester, that these strands are, so it's not just a London thing.
No, that's what's really good about it, actually, in the way that it's structured, because quite often, and I'm talking about English people here rather than British people, Jenny, when English people talk about British food, they end up just talking about English food. And then most of them just end up talking about London, because everything's represented there. So it's nice that everything gets, or each region, gets a look in. So that was really nice.
That was very important to us, yes.
So you could put in things like dog pudding.
I know, which is spectacularly obscure, yes.
Your book is The Great British Food Tour, so let's have a little British food tour now.
Yes, okay.
Maybe we should talk about Wales first. One of the things that I've discovered over the last maybe 10 years of doing research is just how diverse our pancakes and griddle cakes are. Although most of us are probably reduced to have some crepes once a year on Pancake Day. The best of the British pancakes and griddle cakes, I think, are Welsh.
Yeah.
And the best of those are Welsh cakes.
Yeah. absolutely delicious.
I'm so glad you put them in there.
Yes, I did a recipe for the book, and I made them, which reminded myself all over again how delicious they are, and they're absolutely irresistible. If you've never made them, I would warmly recommend that you hunt out a recipe. I mean, Jane Grigson has a very classic one, and make them, because you pack them out and you cook them on this griddle, which is a very characteristic Welsh sort of culinary utensil in the kitchen. A lot of Welsh cooking's done on a griddle pan. It's like a bit like making out a scone, but you cut out, you sort of make this very soft, sticky dough, traditionally using lard as well as butter, which gives it a lovely texture. I'm a big fan of lard.
Oh, it's very important to use the lard.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of lard in
Yeah.
pastry and cooking. And it's hard to find good lard, so that's in brackets. And so, but then you sort of cut them out with your little cutter. They're spiced and they've got little currants in them and they're sweet. And then you cook them on this hot griddle pan, and they go, you turn them over, and then you eat them like, hot from that griddle pan. And it's just so, and you can I always do invariably put extra butter on them. You don't really need it because there's quite a lot of fat in it already. But it's just something about the cold butter melting onto a hot griddle cake makes it even more delicious as far as I'm concerned. And, they're delectable. So you're a fan, Neil?
I'm a big fan. In fact, talking about adding extra butter, I'm a big fan of Jane Grigson's, in the same book, English Food, her singing hinnies, which are very similar. There's no added sugar, but I apply her rule that she has for those two Welsh cakes, and that's to split them. They're very thin, but if you get them fresh off the griddle, you can split them quite easily. Then you put your
bit of butter.
Decent knob of butter inside and clip.
Yummy. Yeah. She knew her food, Jane Grigson. That's and her description of singing hinnies is lovely. I think I quote from it in the book, actually, because I wanted to share her voice. I mean, she did so much charting. When you're doing a book like this now, I'm obviously standing on the shoulders of wonderful people who've charted British food and English food. I mean, one of my heroes is actually Henry Mayhew, the Victorian journalist who wrote London Labour and London Poor, which he's so interesting. He interviewed working people. It's massive, impressive work, and these very vivid accounts, and which bring home, in fact, the poverty and the deprivation of life in London in the 19th century. And a lot of people are trying to make a living, and so he will talk to people who are, watercress sellers and eel sellers, and because he's taught. Yes, I'm always obviously drawn to the food bits. He does write other things, but I'm always fascinated to see what he says about the realities of trying to make a living from selling food in London, and these very vivid accounts he gives.
Yeah, it's such an important resource. In fact, that his name and his book gets mentioned so often on the podcast. I need to do an episode just on that.
You should. I'd love. Yeah,
I'm going to write that down.
I would love. I think. He's like one of my heroes, because the sort of democratic approach where he's treating and recording working class people and giving these insights to lives is so valuable. It's a wonderful resource.
What's great about it is he's not judgy.
No. He's
just writing an account.
He's a great chronicler. Yes, it's very impartial. So, I mean, Wales was interesting because what struck me was quite funny. You have all these classic, iconic dishes like Glamorgan sausages, and Welsh rarebit, which is all Welsh rabbit, as it says, it's spelled. And it's a lava bread. I think the funny thing about all these things is that, you have the sausages are not made with meat. They're made with cheese, with Caerphilly cheese, traditionally. And the Welsh rabbit, I mean, that was a rabbit hole, appropriately, because it was, because trying to find out why it was called rabbit, it's like, okay, this could go on forever, and I didn't really have the time to do it. So we'll just have to be that it was known as rabbit. It was known as rabbit. You may know more than this about Neil.
Well, it's just been assumed, isn't it? That's a bit of a culinary joke.
Yes.
Because there was so little meat going around.
It doesn't have rabbit in it. And then lava bread, which absolutely fascinates me. So despite the word bread, it's not a bread. It's made from seaweed. And that's what's, I think, and I just thought, gosh, hats off to the Welsh, because they are, they were using the resources of their land, including the seascape and the beach. So some of the quintessential Welsh foods relate to their geography. So cockles. And then lava, the seaweed that they were gathering from the shore, which is then shaped and mixed with a little bit of cornmeal maybe and sort of patted and fried to make lava bread. And the gathering of seaweed was a really important source of income for rural households in Wales. And again, that's it. So when you read about that history, then the coming of the railway helps the cockle sellers get their cockles to market, and presumably they'll sell lava bread into bigger markets, and so it provides more income, presumably, which is really interesting. But just this, I think one of the strands running through the whole book I realised was that was the ingenuity and also frugality that people. We live in an age where we're very lucky. The money we spend on food, I know I'm talking an age of price rises and cost of living has gone up, but historically, what we spend on food is very low as a proportion of income. And food was scarce. It was hard to get food. And so a lot of the dishes in the book come from much more frugal times, something like haggis, obviously, using offal in this way, and the whole, very rich sort of black pudding heritage using blood. And then, and so the Glamorgan sausages go back to that. It's very tasty, it's softened leek, a little bit of cheese, because cheese also sort of costs money too, and breadcrumbs, and then bound together, and then fried in. Absolutely. In fact, I made them again for the book and just reminded myself how yummy they are. Again, another dish I would recommend to people to make. We've got these wonderful things, yeah.
I love a Glamorgan sausage. One thing I was always disappointed by, was I think the first time I made them, I bought Caerphilly cheese, but I bought it from a supermarket. I was just thinking, well, this is insipid. Then I remade them because I found some farmhouse Caerphilly at my local cheesemonger in Chorlton, South Manchester.
Fantastic cheesemongers, the Chorlton ones. They're brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. So good.
So that's really interesting that you talk about the difference between farmhouse and supermarkets. They probably would have sold you Gorwith Caerphilly, which is a really wonderful farmhouse Caerphilly. And what's fascinating when you look at Caerphilly is it's a cheese that, historically was Welsh, named after Caerphilly in Wales, was very popular in the 19th century and was made, it is a gentle cheese because it's sort of younger, really, than, let's say, a mature cheddar, which I think means it can very easily be bland when they've speeded up the making and everything's not just curdled really quickly and you just get a little bit of acidity and not much interest, really. So to get flavour, you need someone who takes more time with it, does it more carefully.
No pun intended there. Sorry.
You're terrible, Neil.
They do it carefully.
And that is the great cheese pun, isn't it, that everyone always says.
Looking at England, now, huge variety of different dishes and produce out there. But one thing that really leapt out to me are the fish dishes. I suppose for the whole of Britain too, but particularly in England, because people say, don't they, that the English, the British, being an island nation, don't really like fish beyond cod and haddock. But it was nice to see a huge variety in there.
Yes, it's interesting you noticed that. It's a very good point, and you're absolutely correct, because, we have eels in London, which are a fish, even though they look like snakes. They slither through London's history. I think very interestingly, again, there's a wonderful account of the pie and mash, the people who run pie and mash shops, who also sell jellied eels, going to get their eels, going down to Bingsgate Market, which are the great big Dutch barges that brought eels over. Isn't that fascinating?
Right,
so,
yes.
Because nowadays, guess where people get their eels from? From Holland. So that's the same, that tradition carries on. And it was... Again, I think it goes back to the point I was making that, people were hungry and they needed food and they ate what they could find in rivers, in the sea. So we have, herrings in East Anglia very caught up in that history and pilchards. But what was also interesting is I would say is that a lot of those fish were caught and then sold abroad. So the salted pilchards are for Catholic countries who want to allowed to eat salted fish on their fasting days, who come on that tradition of observing fasting days and only eating fish, not eating meat. Mm-hmm. And the herrings were sold to the Baltic states. Again, the beloved food there. So we have, we do have them, but equally, a lot of the fish we catch, we preserve. Think of the wonderful potted shrimps, which are so delicious. Yeah, what a food. Beautiful. I mean, but the tragic thing when you write about any of the fishing stories is that you always end up, the fisheries in decline. That's literally the story of every fish that we've eaten and enjoyed in abundance. We are greedy and we take too much and the population crashes, and that's just repeated over and over again. So then, we don't have shells of pilchards. I mean, I loved the idea that in the Cornish economy, it was a poor one, and pilchards were a very, very important source of food and income through the salting and preserving of them. And so in Cornwall, we have they would have their watchers up on the cliffs to watch for these great shells of pilchards that would come through. And the job of the person on the cliff was to kick up a hue and cry. And they were called hewers. And there's little watch towers in are called hewer towers. And there's one still in Newquay you can visit. So it's just, again, it's that reminder to this different age when this was a really, really important source of food. And that those shells of fish swimming through, they would set up a great big racket. Everyone in the village would would rush out. The fishermen would go out in boats and they would surround the shoal with their nets and then bring them on into shore. So that we had the fishermen, and the women would, as far as I understand it, were doing the processing, the kinning, the catching, the salting. They would work really hard doing this labour, stack it up. And so the fish oil would be used to light lamps, so nothing is wasted. we've lost that. We don't value food really in a way, I think. But I think COVID brought that to light. Actually, it's really important to stay alive. You need to eat, you need access to food, you need to be able to buy it. So, when your supply suddenly, sort of the luxury of lots of things, and an abundance to choose from, it's very affordable. And so, I remember sharing eggs that my milkman had delivered to me with a neighbour. It was hard to get eggs at the time. And I felt, it was like going back to World War II, sharing what you had with your friends and family.
Yeah, it really made us realise that there's such an amazing array of local foods, artisan foods. It helped the farmhouse cheese industry enormously. People just had most people had a bit more time on their hands, so people could kind of stop and hunt these things out.
Because you weren't allowed to go out. You were at home and, you weren't going to restaurants, really. So, because, for restaurants, hospitality trade is such a massive hit. We should still, we're still seeing its effects, really, I think. Yes, I think what's really fun about doing this book is you could see actually how we did really enjoy and eat fish and seafood with, way more than you would think. Because nowadays our national dish is fish and chips, which is a very disguised way of eating fish. It's filleted and it's coated in the back. I love fish and chips. I really do. I love good fish and chips. That's my caveat to that, because there's lots of really bad fish and chips out there. Yeah, sadly. But, creme of crab. A crab sandwich, that is one of the joys, I think, of a British seaside holiday, if you're lucky enough to be involved. I associate with holidays in Devon, but also in Norfolk, and, a beautiful sweet fleshed crab, absolutely gorgeous.
So delicious. I was quite squeamish, I have to say, when I was younger about any kind of shellfish, especially bivalves, because they're so alien. And harking back to Jane Grigson cooking. So I cooked all the recipes in English food.
Well done. Gosh, that's a labour of love. That's impressive. Yeah.
There's a couple of stragglers, but it forced me to eat a lot of foods that I was squeamish about. And that was things like oysters and scallops and even mussels and things like that. And oysters get a mention, in fact, because I suppose that is possibly the people who are squeamish about fish. That's kind of the epitome.
Yes, to be squeamish.
Knocking back a raw
oyster.
And
what's interesting is, oysters were really cheap and they were widely eaten. And, so it wasn't now they're a luxury, and B, and they were consumed really widely. So, without squeamishness, which is really interesting. And I put in the Whitstable oyster and the fowl oyster. Because what's really interesting about when you come to shellfish, and particularly oysters, which are very slow growing, you have the concept of miroir as opposed to terroir. So terroir is to do with the earth and the place. So obviously famously applied to wines and the grapes and the soil they're grown in, the conditions. But also if you talk to fishmongers, you have the different parts of the sea. They're different plankton, different algae, different minerals in the water, and different salinity. So which really affect the flavours of oysters. So oysters really are very expensive a place. And they take a good few years to ripen, depending on what they've been. I think it's at least 2-3 years. And then they're harvested. And I think what's fascinating, of course, is that, which I hadn't really thought about, but oysters, because they're in those tightly sealed shells, it makes them portable because they stay alive. If you keep them cool, keep them a little bit damp, you can then transport them. So the Romans, famously the Romans loved our Colchester oysters and would even take them back to Rome. Amazing, isn't it? That's a pretty sophisticated empire. So, yes.
If people are squeamish about oysters, they really needn't be. Start with a cooked oyster, I would say. In fact, one of the things that sprang to mind there where you were talking about them was about how cheap they were and how expensive they are now. If you go back to a classic English dish is the steak, kidney and oyster pudding.
Quite right.
And older recipes say, and if you can afford it, put in some mushrooms. Because they were quite expensive. Even the ones that were cultivated were expensive because they were still working out how to do it. Whereas, of course, now it's put as many mushrooms in, if you like, and if you can afford it, I'm going to do oysters.
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? I love those little swings, and that's a very good point.
Now, travelling up to Scotland, again, it's one of these things where maybe Scotland isn't considered a nation of sweet eaters. But one of the things when I was looking through the book is that just how many very regional sweet delicacies there are in Scotland. Things like Edinburgh Rock, I would say, is the main one, but also things that have sort of burst out of the country, like Iron Brew.
Yes. Yeah.
And things like that. And marmalade, of course.
Yeah, marmalade. I mean, that's a good story, isn't it? Because, that marmalade is thought that the word would have been, it comes from quinces. You think of membrio, and so, obviously fruits were, sugar and salt are the great preserving ingredients. And again, in an age, and you think back, pre-refrigeration, it's, food has to be made to see you through the lean winter months. So there's we have this very rich preserving tradition of smoking and using sugar and salt to make preserves, and fruits would have been turned into conserves. And then the story of marmalade is that it was a very canny Scotswoman. There was a big cargo of Seville oranges were going cheap. I can't remember if there's a shipwreck involved. I think there may well be a shipwreck involved in that story. Yes, I think there is. And she, Dundee woman, very thrifty, canny, brought them up, wanted to keep them so they didn't go off, and cooked them, made them into a jam, made this jam, which was called marmalade, which would have been a term applied to, quince preserves, but then she used it was made with this oranges. And it worked a treat. And she, and she very cleverly, they were very savvy. She sort of patented it, didn't she? And she sold it and packeted it and became her iconic thing. And then, and then beloved through Britain.
It did exist as a dessert course previously. People would have it in little glasses with, set and eaten with the spoons in the very, very sweet dessert course. But I think because up in Dundee, it was suddenly being made in really quite large amounts. It went from posh person's after dinner treat to something that was a bit more affordable, and we can thank the Scots for making marmalade a breakfast ingredient.
And that's also linked, of course, to the history of sugar, which has got a very dark side of it because of the plantation, the production of sugarcane, and the slavery involved in that. But it meant that sugar was very cheap, and it's and there was this whole idea that sugar, it gave a lot of calories to people. So working people working in, especially linked to the Industrial Revolution, working in factories, needing calories, cheap sugary food was really important for that.
It was nice to see that you mentioned Tunnock's tea cakes.
Yes.
And whenever I think of Tunnock's tea cakes, I thought I was the only person who thought this, I instantly think of the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games. And you mentioned it.
I did. Because I was like, that's too good not to put in my book. I want that story in. So, I mean, we should explain for listeners that, there's so much sort of part of Glasgow's history that they featured at the Commonwealth Games, So, yes, as dancers dressed as Tunnock's tea cakes performed. So, which is just a sort of a glorious image, I think. But, and again, it's so interesting, isn't it, the way that confectionery plays such a, we become so fond of confectionery, I think that, because often it has childhood associations, you have your sweet tooth as a child, and what's really funny is I think, did I really eat gobstoppers? Because it was so incredibly dangerous. And I was walking home from school, this huge piece of rock hard sugar, waiting, taking it out with little sticky fingers, see if it had changed colour, and I got through to the white yet, and then waiting until I got the tiny little aniseed in the middle. And, but I don't eat gobstoppers anymore because, which my dentist must be, it's pretty sorry that I don't eat them anymore. But I do think that you often have an affection for things you had as a child. I am very fond of Chloe's chocolate orange, so I was very happy to put that into the book.
Oh, it was also nice to see tablet in there too, because that's one of my favourites in your section for the Scottish. It's really good. It's tooth-achingly sweet, but somehow they make it very palatable.
I know, that's the perfect
I don't know how to do
description.
it.
Yeah, absolutely right. Because you have a bit and you're like, whoa, and then you're like, I'm going to have another bit now. Yeah. You can't resist.
Popping over to Northern Ireland.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to sound reductive here, because when people talk about Ireland, they often talk about potatoes. However, I'm going to talk about potatoes, if you don't mind, because I think that the best potato dishes come from Ireland. That's why I want to mention it. People might just think of roast potatoes or mashed potatoes or boiled potatoes. In Ireland, you mentioned champ and boxty in particular. Yeah. There's like potato dumplings and some things that I'd never had. I've never had potato apple dumplings before.
Yeah, neither have I.
I'd very much like to try them. But I just thought, it's so nice that it's a celebration of these amazing potato dishes, because of course there was a bottleneck in Ireland when it came to potatoes and the potato famine. They were very much welcomed back with open arms, of course.
Yes.
Everyone very pleased, because they're the most productive plant, aren't
are.
they? When it comes to making starch or carbs,
Yeah.
it's the most productive plant. So yes, there is that association, and I just think it's such a celebration of the deliciousness of the potato.
Yeah, and champ is really lovely. It's sort of flavoured with a little bit of spring onion and butter. Butter again, full fat milk. Go the dairy. So you embrace the dairy. It's like that's what with these dishes they do.
Don't cut any corners.
Yeah. It's not about skimping. It's about and good potato. And I love the fact that in Britain we have the range of potatoes with their different textures that lend themselves to being used in different ways. So. Obviously, if you want a potato salad, you'd want that new potato texture, that sort of slightly denser, starchier potato. But the floury potatoes, as we call them, like King Edward's, which is, a very famous British potato, which again, like they said in the book, and it's got a really interesting history because the name is given out of sort of sheer sycophancy, I think, to try and big it up and make it a bestseller. And so, which I also like, in the coronation year by an enterprising grower. But to go back to the potatoes and the place in Northern Ireland, what I tried to do in this book is reflect, the historic reality, the heritage, and also try and convey a sense of how cherished these foods are, how important they are, how they're beloved. And that was what I wanted to do. I wanted people to pick up the book. I mean, it's been sold in the National Trust. It was a National Trust book, so it will be available in National Trust shops, which obviously includes a lot of visitors to Britain. And I wanted people to come away thinking, I want to try that. That sounds amazing. I want to do, I wanted to, I think I did want that sense of how special and rich and diverse and still and alive and thriving our British food scene is, and how it's got all these different aspects, all these threads, the industrial past, the rural past, wonderful, so when you go up to the Lake District, I put in Herdwick sheep, leaving Northern Ireland for a minute and heading across to Cumbria, because, they are really important. They create our landscape. Was made by these fell farmers and those Herdwick sheep. The story the sort of story that's told is they think they trace back to the Vikings, which is a great image, may or may not be true. They're an ancient breed of sheep. They're absolutely remarkable. They're very intelligent. They're very hardy. They live up in these fells. They know their way around, and that way of farming is under threat too. For at the moment, and they're partly there's a lot of controversy. The farming community, I think, is being very let down by the government, well, not just this government, but government with a capital G, over subsidy. And we need to look after our farmers, because farmers make food, and you can't just think. I think this idea that Britain is so wealthy we can just buy whatever we want whenever we want. When we're in an age now of the climate crisis is coming, it's going to affect harvest, it's going to affect transport. Countries that have food may not want to sell it abroad, because they may need to feed their own hungry people. And so we need to really look at, I suppose, sorry, I've gone into a sort of serious mode, but I just feel like we should actually look at our food system and try and put in some resilience into it, which means allowing farmers to make a living and supporting them. Yeah. That seems quite basic to me.
Yeah. And it's eating and cooking those dishes or using those ingredients to make those dishes that are important. And certainly reading through it, I mean, bearing in mind it's my day job to think about British food. Reading through it was just, there's so much diversity in there. It made me want to go out and eat food or cook food, which is what you want.
That's exactly what I want. I'm very pleased to have that effect on you, Neil, because, you must be, pretty saturated, I would say, with British food history. So if it had that effect, I'm delighted.
It's time to wrap up, Jenny.
It's really lovely to be invited onto your fantastic podcast, so thank you very much.
Oh, no, it's been great. It's great to meet you at last.
I'm sure our paths will cross at some point.
Before you go, I just thought to ask, how can people find and see your good work?
Well, hopefully it'll be in a good bookshop near you, online. You have to mention Amazon, but I see, wonderful booksellers like Waterstones will stock the book. The Great British Food Tour is being sold in National Trust shops, because I've seen it in National Trust shops, which is exciting. But it's also not just sold at National Trust shops. It's sold in the trade, in the book trade as well. So you should be able to find it. This is not the only book by me to appear this spring. I've actually got two others. One is called Repast, the Story of Food, which is published by Thames and Hudson, and it was written in collaboration with the British Museum. And it tells the story of food using the British Museum collection, objects in the collection, 300 very varied objects. It's a very beautiful illustrated book.
Oh, it's a fantastic
Very
book.
grown up. And then my third book, which I also loved writing, was the Kew Gardens salad book, published by Kew. And I would say, plug for Kew Gardens, that money from that book goes to support Kew's very important work into biodiversity. And that's just come out, and that is 65 vegetarian salad recipes, which I made up for Kew. So it's totally different from this book. It was like me exploring, putting things in that people don't normally put into salads, and having a lot of fun in creating recipes that are wonderfully easy, because salads are joyfully easy to do, but just deliver something delicious, with a little touch with the dressing or some garnish. And that's on sale too. So there you go. So you should be able to find one of those.
Oh, thanks again for sparing the time to come on. This has been such good fun.
I've loved it, Neil. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jenny. There are links to Jenny's website, podcast, socials, and her new book, The Great British Food Tour, in the show notes. There are links too to the National Trust website and her other books, plus links, podcast episodes, blog posts on things like singing hinnies, knock pudding, Glamorgan sausages, Welsh rarebit, the pie and mash shops of London, and Tunnock's tea cakes at the Commonwealth Games, of course. But let's just talk a quick bit of news. Let's start with the blog. A new recipe landed, one for Cumbrian tatey pot. It's an unctuous mixture of lamb, beef and black pudding, slowly baked in stock, all topped with potato. It used to be on the menu at the buttery when it was open back in the day. I used, of course, fruit pig black pudding, so please don't forget their special offer that will be running for the duration of this 9th season. It would be great if you could support them. Also, I'm going to be leading a short food history heritage trail in Bradford city centre, close to City Hall, on Sunday, the 27th of July. It's part of a food festival for kids called Bradford Little Foodies. There are 3 sessions, morning, lunchtime and afternoon. It's free, but you do have to book, so I've put the Eventbrite link in the show notes. Remember, if you've got any comments, questions or queries regarding this or any episode, please contact me or leave a message on social media. Did this episode, and I'm sure it must have, did it spark off any food memories for you? Please let me know, because there will be a podcast episode at the end of the season. So, email me at neil@britishfoodhistory.com or find me on social media, Twitter and Blue Sky at Neil Buttery, Instagram and Threads as Dr. that's Dr_Neil_Buttery. If you're listening on YouTube, leave a comment there or post on the British Food History Facebook discussion page at facebook.com/groups/British Food History, or leave a comment on the Spotify app. A big thank you to Thomas Ntinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast for his mixing and sound engineering. Please do check out his podcast. There's a very good recent episode on the history of spam. So please go check that out. Until next time though, cheerio.